Sure, my stream is running. Ba 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 ba. Cool. All right. All right. Couple things before we start. As a reminder, final paper is due in 3 weeks. Um, so that's what's happening. Also, I meant to tell you guys last week, but I forgot. There's a blood drive tomorrow here at the school. If you want to give blood, you're welcome to. Apparently, you get a $30 gift card, either Amazon, Visa, or MasterCard, so you can use it on whatever. Um, just that's the thing. I should have told my big class on Thursday, but I forgot. So yeah, that's just something that's going on. You can either sign up in the front office if you want, or there's flyers just like sitting around on the tables that have a QR code on them that you can sign up online if you're interested. That's up to you. That's all I got. Any questions from you lot before you get into it? All right. So we have an extra chapter before we get into World War I, compared to my American history course, and that is the crisis of liberalism and the making of mass society, which is to say, like the Roaring Twenties, which I mean our American history kind of no, not the Roaring Twenties. That's after World War I. I'm getting my times mixed up. This is like the end. This is more of a thing in Europe because they sort of see the war coming. They don't. Well, some people see how bad it's going to be. They know something's about to happen. There's just this feeling in the air. They're building up to something. Technology's increasing. Countries are becoming more aggressive. Countries are becoming more competitive, and something's got to give. And well, World War I happens, and my history professor that really got me into all of this, he said, and I think he actually got this from one of his history professors, that at least in Europe, the 19th century doesn't end until 1914 in terms of culture. In the early 1900s, 1900 to 1914, it's still 1800s society. It's still the big mustaches and it's still the Gilded Age. It's still the nouveau riche. It's still the not quite nobility, but still kind of nobility running everything. It's just we have all this new technology, and you've got sort of the nobility coming out of the commoners becoming really rich, and they're kind of the new nobility, and there's a lot of turmoil, and then it comes crashing down with the World War, which really changes things. So that's what this chapter is going to be, is everything leading up to the First World War. In America, the First World War just kind of happens, and we're not really involved until kind of the end. And it mostly affects us, like, manufacturing-wise. The First World War is kind of a footnote in our American history class. So let's talk about the end of the century, the end of the 1800s, and this French word that I've yet to properly know how to pronounce. Fin de Sil, I don't know. end of the century. As the 19th century came to an end, people saw it as a time of great change. Things would never be the same. This break, a clean break in the past, this new future coming forward, which, I mean, as I was just saying, not really. But the populace at the time felt like it would be. I mean, like when the year 2000 happened, it was like, oh, it's going to be this big thing, and then it really wasn't. Like the early 2000s were just more 90s. There wasn't really a shift in the culture until like I would say the late 2000s and the early 2010s were kind of their own thing. As someone who grew up in the 90s, like the early 2000s just felt like more 90s. There were changes in banking, voting, technology, social structures. There were changes happening, but it's not like when the clock rolled over to 1900, suddenly everything's different. I mean, it's time. It doesn't really mean anything. So the people hope for a better tomorrow, while those at the top fear that there would be a radical shake-up of their power base, because obviously the ones who have power want things to stay the same. And, well, when we get to World War II, World War I, I'll get more into what that means. So this began in the 1870s. Well, beginning in the 1870s and then in the 1880s, as Germany started to develop, because, well, Germany is now a thing. You no longer have a bunch of little German states and, well, Prussia that's kind of scary. You now have proper Germany, this unified nation in the middle of Europe that's kind of scary. Like, big-ass Russia straight up. All sorts of new technologies. 1876, the four-stroke gas engine, telephone, incandescent lamp, lots of new technologies. Now again, just because you have this gas engine, telephone, and what's essentially a light bulb, doesn't mean everybody has it. So we still have a lot of steam power well into the early 1900s. We still have telegraphs for a while and gas lighting for a while. But that means these technologies exist and they're starting to spread. Oh, yeah, that was it. I forgot that my slides in this chapter aren't really long. So technology was increasing. This is causing prices to fall and wages to rise. So Europeans are actually doing pretty well. So there was mobility, both literally, physically, people moving about. 1871, between 1871 and 1891, 27.6 million immigrated outside of Europe, creating a Caucasian tsunami, which is like both sounds really interesting but also really boring. It's like, ooh, mayonnaise. And again, going back to my American history class, there were less Germans heading out, more coming from like Italy and Scotland, and then eventually like Eastern Europe. Most of them heading to the United States, looking for fortunes. Some made it, such as Joseph Pulitzer, while most lived and died in the gutters, working for basically nothing. Because, you know, it's a numbers game at the end of the day. You know, I saw a comic recently where like it was two girls trying on dresses and one of them is looking in a mirror. She goes, I look like a noble medieval woman, and she's like, I wish I could have lived back then. And the other girl is like, not even medieval, it was like Victorian era, and the other girl is just imagining like growing up and having like 12 children and then dying at like age 28. It's like, yeah, that's about how it went along. Like you wouldn't live very long and you would not have been happy. That was the Victorian era for like 98% of the people. Um, Now, obviously, it wasn't just the United States. So in this era, 4.5 million Europeans moved to Argentina. Now, this was before the German movement to Argentina in the 40s. 4.5 million moved to Canada. 2 million moved to Australia and New Zealand. 1.5 million moved to Northern Africa. 2 million Russians moved west to the Siberian hinterlands, which, like, why? It's like, man, I really hate these cities and their heating elements. I'm going to move to Siberia and live like a freaking caveman. Which, I mean, you do you, I guess. Russians, they're different. I mean, people still do live in Siberia. There's apparently a city so far north in Siberia that unless your car is parked in a garage, you have to leave it on or it will freeze solid that you can't crank it back up until like the next summer. So when you like go to the grocery store, you have to leave it parked and you have to leave it on in the parking lot the whole time you're in the store, or the gasoline will freeze. It's amazing. Horrifying. Never want to go there. But it's amazing that like people are just like, yeah, that's fine. We'll live here. Why not? Anyway, there is Mr. Pulitzer. Here is a weird north-down map of the world with sort of Australia kind of off in the corner there. New Zealand is not even on it. Poor New Zealand. They never get to show up. Anyway, this is just showing you sort of a weird, like, where everybody's going on maps out of Europe. Actually, out of everywhere. Out of Africa, out of South Africa, out of Japan, out of China, just sort of all over. All right. Let's talk about the growth of the cities. We talked about that a little bit already. The technology of the cities, but there was this movement within Europe as well. Within the countries, from the countryside to the booming cities, London especially, this massive population moving into London, which increased the speed which mechanization and mass society progressed. Because when you get a lot of people, how did I say it last time? The cities created jobs, so people moved in to fill those jobs. And as more people moved in, they needed to build more infrastructure, more buildings, and rail lines and whatnot to serve the people that were moving in, which therefore created more jobs, which more people moved in to fill, which then required more stuff to be built, which created more jobs, so more people moved in. So it created like this expanding, not only job market, but literally an expanding city. Yeah, urban centers grew ridiculously quickly at this time, which today it's like it takes 2 years to fill a pothole. Back then, like a city went from this little dinky town to a massive metropolis in like the course of a decade. Bathtubs, electricity, telephones. If you were the upper class, you got what you would think of today as like modern stuff. But this was in like the early 1900s, which back then was like top of the line. I mean, a bathtub in London? That's crazy. The lower classes, though, of course, were most people, and they were in the slums where they caught horrible diseases and died at like 20. Still, though, there were public works to try to make things a little better. Don't drink water out of the river where you poop. The biggest contribution was mass transit. For example, the London Underground, which was the world's first subway system, carried 30,000 people on its opening day in 1863, which is crazy. Like, I mean, I don't know how, I mean, I guess just a regular size, passenger train, but like that thing was running all day long, moving 30,000 people. That's crazy. I mean, obviously it's not as like complex as modern day subway systems because those things move a lot of people a day. But for like opening day, that's ridiculous. It's absolutely wild. So here we have like the early cities before all the growth. You've got these little 4-story buildings, not much to it. You still got the horses and wagons. The roads are mostly dirt. And then you get this. I think this is Vienna. Again, you've got like Kodak cameras here. What's this in the back? Philips? They did light bulbs, I guess. And then you've just got a line of cars here in the middle, and then just pedestrians. Because European cities are typically walkable, which is foreign to us as Americans. Here we have the London Underground being built, which is a little bit terrifying. That's to keep the tunnel from collapsing while they're building it, which is lovely. This is the 100-year anniversary of the London Underground, I think. The Underground Pioneer, they replaced, well, not replace, they put in like an old engine and a bunch of old cars for like the anniversary. Obviously this isn't actually like pumping out coal dust. This is I guess it's electric. I mean, they've got like steam stuff just for show. But you got people over here with like smartphones taking pictures. It's clearly modern day. But the picture they took to show it is black and white for the sake of it looking nice. But yeah, this is neat. I mean, what the British love their rail lines, especially the Londoners. Because again, London Underground, pretty big deal. What else do we have? Oh, I love this weird image. This just sort of unsettling, very Victorian era picture of the Tube, as it's also called, where you just got these people just sort of hanging out, waiting on the train, and because of the long exposure time of the photograph, everything's just kind of fuzzy and ghostly looking. Also, Viking milk was a brand back then. You can get Viking milk or Nestle milk. This one's got a cat on it, so I don't know. We will be back to the London Underground when we get to World War II, because that's where they hung out to get away from the bombers. All right, less literal mobility. There was a lot of social mobility in the fin de Sille metropolis, turn of the century, whatever. People were making more money, more job opportunities, so people were able to move up the social ladder, which is mostly to say like middle class. If you were born in the working class, in the labor class, you probably were stuck. But if you were lucky enough to be in middle class, you could probably make a bit better for yourself. Middle class expanded, so the need for lawyers, doctors, shopkeepers, like white collar stuff. And the major force behind the expanding middle class and the expanding increased wages was education. Education is always very important. So, always be wary when someone wants to get rid of education. Even absolutist monarchs could see the benefit in having an educated citizenry, but especially if you ensure that the citizenry was loyal with what you allowed them to learn. there was obviously some level of restriction to the education depending on the country. It also depended on the class of the child. Upper classes got a lot more opportunities than working class. Working class children could get like, our brain just shut off there. Working class children could get like elementary education, and that'd be about it. Like not even high school level. Whereas, upper class children, they, university and beyond, pretty much guaranteed. There was also some improvement for women. Some were able to actually work independently, while others, like the suffragettes, would push for the right for women to vote, which the British beat us out, I think, by a year in terms of giving women the right to vote. I think they gave women the right to vote in 1918. We didn't get ours together until 1918, whereas it was much earlier in other countries. Here we have just the best image of a class of children that don't want to be there. Put your hands behind your backs, kids. Quit fidgeting around. Some of them are smiling. Most of them are just like, eh. Look how confused this kid is. What is that? What is that thing? Some of them have never seen a camera before. Here are some women working in. This doesn't appear to be any kind of textile stuff. This looks like they're grinding like metal bits. This looks like a workshop. Another thing women were often tasked to do is working with the typewriters. And I don't know why they've got them crammed together like this, because you do not want your piece of paper to get it caught in another person's typewriter, because their typewriters are mean. They will eat your paper. They will eat your hands. They will eat your hair. Put your hair back, please. Typewriters will eat everything they can get their grubby little mechanical bits on. Yeah. I don't know why they've crammed these poor women together like this. Yeah, typewriters are serious business. My grandmother had one, and the keys would always get stuck, and you have to. I mean, granted, it was very old, so. But yeah, the typewriters are also extremely heavy. But yeah, I'm telling you, this piece is just waiting to get caught in this if she doesn't finish it. Here are women going out to vote, or calling for the ability to vote. Votes for women. Now the thing about the suffragettes is the British suffragettes were a bit more, what's the term, direct action than the Americans. The Americans were like, hey, we should have the right to vote because it's only right. And the British were like, we will break your freaking kneecaps. We will throw pig's blood on you. And they would. Arise, go forth and conquer. Strive and hold cheap the bargain, I think is what that one says. The bill, the whole bill, nothing but the bill. Through thick and thin when we begin. I mean, they were, the British suffragettes were great. If you're hurting for a topic, this one's pretty good. All right. Another thing that, I mean, I wouldn't go so far as to say leads to the First World War, but this is important in like putting this into context. Is like mass culture. Newspapers are cheaper to print now. More people are at least relatively literate. Again, elementary education is pretty much guaranteed, even for the working class. They should at least be able to read and do basic math. So there was this move towards mass culture. Scandal and sensationalist stories sold more, so newspapers started moving towards that rather than, regular news. What? Who would have thought? Describing affairs, exotic travels, murder trials, stuff that would sell newspapers. Music became more widely available, no longer restricted to churches and royal courts. We had music halls, public houses, which a public house is a pub. I can speak from experience. When I was in Ireland, we went to Cork, which is on the west coast of Ireland, and apparently there is a tradition. It depends on whether you want to acknowledge this tradition or not, but apparently this pub did, where if you come in with you and your boys and you've got a little band and you want to play music for the pub, you will get free drinks until you can't play music anymore. So there was a group of guys sitting in the corner with their guitars and whatnot, singing and playing music for the pub, and they were getting drinks until they were not able to continue playing music. It was very Irish. So lots of working class citizens could come in and listen to music and songs that they otherwise wouldn't have been able to appreciate. Which again, when you think of a saloon, you always think of there being music in it. Somebody's got a piano, or there's a singer in the corner. So that even translated here to America. You go into the place where the drinks are, and there's also entertainment. There's music. So it does kind of translate over here as well. But I know, again, I've been to a pub in Ireland, and again today they just play music on the speakers and stuff. But they had live entertainment there. It's just the dude comes in, it's oh yeah, post up here in the corner and entertain us. Visual arts were more accessible, more and affordable museums were being built. Dry plate photography became a thing, so you can actually start taking pictures of stuff and, get a actual visual representation of what's going on, rather than having to rely on someone to be artistically talented enough to paint a scene. Actually, I think dry plate photography is easier than whatever the old version was. That was the huge thing, and it was a science to properly develop it. It's the people that are really into photography do where they've got a dark room and they develop the stuff themselves, and it's all a whole process. They do the old stuff because it's more artsy or whatever. Also, motion pictures became a thing. The brothers Auguste and Louis Lumiere started doing motion pictures. This took hold after 1895. I want to say the first motion picture was a train robbery. It was a cowboy movie. It scared the crap out of the people because I want to say the first scene is a train coming towards the screen, and the people were "Ah!" It was great. Yeah, it's so good. I think not too long after this, they did the first cartoon, which was a dinosaur reaching down and grabbing, I want to say a woolly mammoth by the tail and then throwing it backward, and people were trying to figure out if it's a puppet or how it was working, because the idea of just images playing in sequence to make a thing happen on a screen was weird. They knew how rotoscope worked, with the looking through the slit and spinning it, but the idea of projecting it onto a screen was that didn't compute. It's so cool seeing technology in its infancy that we just sort of take for granted today. And actually, the train robbery, I want to say, also is really unique in that it had had a lot of major what are they called, like tracking shots where there's not a lot of cuts in it, where they're like holding long shots, which is pretty impressive by today's standards. All right, I need a drink. I'm talking a lot. So with the mass society, were people who, I mean, to put it in today's lingo, they were the hipsters. Like, oh, well, if this is going to be what everybody's doing, we got to do something different because we're above this. These avant-garde, they were ahead of the rest in terms of culture, taste, and refinement because, you know, there's always going to be someone that feels like they're above everyone else in terms, not necessarily like the nobility, but like where they're, again, more refined, more in tune with culture. So the idea of modernism is this acceptance that there are deep drives of the subconscious, and they were mysterious, and that many things about the world would remain unknowable. So there's a lot of the modernist mindset of just like mysteries and the unknown and like symbolism of just like distinct otherworldliness almost. Art Nouveau, which simply translates to new art, which as something that's over 100 years old now, whatever. Symbolism took hold as well. This was used in symbolic images such as mythological figures like the Sphinx, which represented the mysteries of the human mind. The Sphinx is always representative of like riddles or mystery or whatever. Because I mean, today we still don't know entirely what the Sphinx was for. Like it's a lion body with a human head on it, and it might not have actually originally been a human head because it's so much smaller compared to the body. It might have originally just been a big old lion that someone carved the head into because he wanted his head to be up there. I don't know. We don't know. We're not sure. Literature often focused on the impending disaster, with Europe reaching newer and greater heights faster and faster. And there was this belief that eventually there would only result in a catastrophic fall. Oscar Wilde's The Picture of Dorian Gray had a decadent aristocrat temporarily escape into a life of decay, only to meet disaster in the end. Portrait of Dorian Gray? I might have wrote that wrong. It says picture of Dorian Gray here. Yeah, it's the whole thing. Actually, this image here is in the book. This is by Arnold Böcklin, The Isle of the Dead. This is a symbolist painting which has been produced many, many times. Combination of mythological themes, surreal rendering of Mediterranean scenery, invited viewers to contemplate the eternal mystery of death. Sigmund Freud and Vladimir Lenin each had a copy. So a lot of people had a copy of this image. So you've got sort of this image of the river Styx with Charon, bringing the dead across to this island with lots of other, there's imagery up here that I don't fully understand either, but it's about like death and mystery, because we don't fully know what happens after people die, because once they're dead, they can't really tell us what's going on. Here is an Art Nouveau piece. A lot of Muha is the artist. a lot of his early pieces were like ads. This is for a cigarette company, as you can tell, because he was very poor. But eventually his art took off, and he was able to make just like regular art. But you can tell it's like a lot of it's almost organic the way his art is. A lot of curls, a lot of like swaying curves. I also have this, which, if you've never seen Nausicaa, this is from Nausicaa, the Valley of the Wind. A Studio Ghibli movie, which is extremely good. This is kind of a mix of Art Nouveau and kind of a stained glass window here as well. But yeah, this is just a piece a fan made that I thought was cool and I wanted to include. All right. Oh, the book also mentions talking about mass culture with like newspapers featuring sensationalist stories. It mentions, for example, newspaper coverage of the mutilation of Jack the Ripper's victims was so graphic that tabloids today would hesitate to print the same details. Yeah, so that's probably why we know so much, or at least are still even thinking of Jack the Ripper, because the newspapers printed what happened in horrific detail back then. All right. So, there was a break in convention when it came to, well, the old days. Some artists like Arthur Rimbaud and Paul Gauguin, yeah, left Europe to be rid of everything that is artificial and conventional, and like moved to, I think, some islands out in the Atlantic. Others remained in Europe to escape convention by challenging it. I don't know. Like I said, I dated an artist for a long time. I spent most of my undergrad in the art department at Francis Marion. Artists are weird. Like, they see the status quo as like a challenge, which, fair, but like these two dudes moving off to these like almost all but uninhabited islands to escape convention, and then these other people like, we must fight convention by challenging it. It's like, they're not fighting slavery or like people being mistreated. They're fighting conventional social norms. And I mean, sure, the social norms of like the early 1900s weren't great, but they weren't like trying to fight for the rights of women or that children shouldn't work in the factories. They were fighting like the art of the day. They just get really passionate. Artists are weird, is all I'm saying. Pablo Picasso's Les Demoiselles d'Avignon broke with convention, viewed the subject as though through a pane of broken glass. I've got that image. I'll show you guys in a minute. Now, granted, this piece did have something to say. I get a little. When I say artists are weird, that's not necessarily an insult, but I do get a little less generous with like when you've got the blank canvas and they just paint it black. It's like, this is art. Okay, but is it though? But like Picasso's stuff, it's the beginning of modern art, but it still means something, and I'll get to that in a minute. Architecture went in the other direction. We have Walter Gropius's Foggus Factory, and God, the amount of times I heard that dude's name. Again, basically living in the art department. I don't know how much he actually did to merit me hearing his name that many times. I think it's just because he had a funny last name. He used art, form, and function to create utilitarian structure with lots of open space for windows to allow in natural light. Um, Again, I've got the factory that I'll show you guys here in a minute. Poetry such as William Butler Yeats, one to evoke the mysterious and mythological, while music like Russian ballet polarized crowds in Paris from roaring applause to literal riots of outrage because Parisians. Yeah. By the way, William Butler Yeats, he is Yeats, actually probably Yeats. He is Irish. In my time in Ireland, I think I was in. Oh no, I can't remember the name of my friend's town. It's terrible. Anyway, I was visiting my friend, and there was like a little tiny museum, and I went in, and like there was a whole wing dedicated to Yeats, W.B. Yeats, and because they're so proud of this guy, but it's like, how do you dedicate an entire wing of museum to poetry? Like, they had excerpts from his poems. It's like, cool, but it's just little pieces of paper with like parts of his poem. That's cool, I guess. They're so proud of him though. The Irish are so proud of their boys and girls. They're very proud of their people that get out in the world and make something of themselves. Russian ballet. Well, I'll get that in a minute. I've got a picture. Yeah, like the Parisians literally rioted. Do, 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 do. Here we are. Yeah, I'll get to that in a minute. So here is Les Demoiselles d'Avignon. Picasso broke with a long tradition of treating the canvas as a window with figures drawn using conventions of perspectival drawing. Instead, Picasso treated the canvas as a two-dimensional surface in his attempt to capture the raw, tragic life of these sex workers. Sorry, light went off. Picasso was inspired by African masks. He is using the perspective as if he's looking through a broken window, like the glass is broken, and so the image is distorted. Not like the window's broken out, but like the glass is shattered. Because these are, he was originally going to call it like, actually, do I have? Yeah, he was gonna go with a much less. It's called Les Demoiselles d'Avignon, which is like the ladies of Avignon. But he wasn't gonna call it like the horrors of Avignon originally. To not as a derogatory, but like to specifically say, hey, these are prostitutes and their lives are broken because they've been forced into this life. Avignon, again, if you're not aware, being like a part of France. Yeah, we're actually going to see another Picasso piece a little bit later on, which again is like the perspective's weird and skewed, but it has a purpose. It has a message that it's stating. So while I don't get most modern art, especially like blank canvas or banana taped to a wall, whatever the hell that is, this I get. Like, when I know what it's supposed to be, I'm like, okay, I get it. There's the Fagus factory, which again, like with the technology of the day, they were able to build a lot of windows. So during the day, there's a lot of natural light. They don't actually have to run the electricity in there for the lights. And then, of course, as the sun goes down, then they crank up electricity. It's a German flag, and I guess that's the European Union flag. Since obviously this was in Germany. Got a Fagus there. That's cool. Do I have a picture of? Here we go. All right, so I want to read this one because it's great. Bum, 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 bum. Where do we have? Here we are. Similarly, a symbolist poem by Stephen Mallarmé inspired French composer Claude Debussy, I'm just going to say, should write Prelude to the Afternoon of a Faun. When the handsome Russian ballet dancer Alexander Nijinsky danced the piece barefooted with overtly sexualized gestures in Paris in 1912, the performance caused a sensation and a revolution in ballet. The harsh dissonance of Russian composer Ivan Stravinsky's primitivist tone poem Rite of Spring provoked a riot on its premiere in Paris in 1913. So again, either they're like, this is a new form of ballet that we've never seen before, or we will burn this place down. The Parisians do nothing halfway. It's great. Also, I mentioned before that we were going to talk about like some of the ways that Russia and France like created the bonds. Besides, we both hate Germany. This was actually one of them. Literally, was like the ballet thing. Despite the fact that again the Parisians were like going to burn the freaking place down, but also the ones that weren't going to burn the place down really, really loved it. So it was one or the other. But this like shared culture of ballet, whether they really, really loved it or they were going to like burn them in the streets, there was passion behind it. All right. Let's get on to some science. Emil Durkheim discussed the increased rates of suicide in the West, which he attributed to annome, or the alienation as the loss of cultural glues that held society together. Basically, this like end result of industrialization, where you're not living in a town where everyone knows everybody anymore. You're living in this mass city, and you're working in a factory. You're just a cog in a machine, and the ways of the old days are gone. I think there's a whole thing. No. I'm thinking of something else. At the end of the chapter. Oh, good! I get to tell you guys the Baltic Fleet story. Yeah, Gustave Le Bon. Gustave Le Bon worked on the behavior of crowds, the loss of individual reasoning, and how leaders could direct mobs. Basically, there's this idea that when you've got a group of people together, the overall IQ, as much as IQ is a thing, because it's really kind of not, but like the overall thinking level of the crowd is that of the lowest common denominator. When you've got a bunch of people together, you can get them to do stupid stuff. Because they get real passionate, they get real riled up, and you get people who by themselves would be more rational and like maybe not want to flip a car. You can get them riled up and do something crazy. And all you need, and you don't need a leader to like plan stuff out. You just need someone to point the crowd to do something, to go in a direction and do something. That's how mobs and riots happen. Sigmund Freud. We're not going to talk much about him. He's got a lot of baggage. Basically, subconscious fears, desires of the human psyche. Most of his stuff has been largely debunked, but he's important because a lot of what he talked about is still like um, fundamental in psychological understanding. Even if again, like we go back and it's like a lot of it is just bunk. Um, but it got us on the track to like modern day psychology. So he's still important. But I'm not going to go too much into his stuff because he's weird. Andre Bergson described the brain as not operating according to logic, but was fluid. Yeah, people brain stuff is weird. And again, this is like early 1900s, so they were sort of extrapolating based on what they can figure out at the time. You don't have brain scans and MRI machines. They're just like, based on what we're seeing, not because you think, oh, well, people are logical, but not everybody is. Again, you've got a crowd of people. It starts getting weird. Louis Pasteur developed vaccination for rabies and anthrax. He heated wine and milk to prevent bacterial growth with pasteurization. So he did a lot of really important stuff. I misspoke last year when I was talking about this. I said he was someone that accidentally created penicillin. That came later. But penicillin was created by accident. I think the guy who created it, like, I want to say left bread out or something, and it like grew mold on it. But it was like in a petri dish, and he put it on. It's like, oh, I wonder if this is weird. It's not the kind of mold that I usually see. So he like scraped it off and then like put it in another petri dish, and then what he had used like killed this bacteria. And he's like, I should look more into this. And it was penicillin. So yeah, but that comes later. Max Planck, Niels Bohr, Albert Einstein. Again, we could go into them all day, but I'm not. It's too much science. Basically, physics became more about probability. There was a lot less certainty in physics. There was a lot of like, well, again, just probability of like how atoms worked and how gravity worked and how space worked. It's more about how things will probably go, because there's still a lot that we're not entirely sure of, because there's just a lot of math in there we don't see yet. Which is kind of where the whole like dark matter, dark energy thing came from, because like there's something here we can't see that is causing like a 0.1% fluctuation in the math that is changing it ever so slightly that we don't fully understand yet. That is my really dumb explanation of why it's probable rather than certain for terms of physics. Like on the classroom lab Earth scale to like a 0.001 decimal, we can stick with certain. But when we're talking about like astrophysics level stuff, it's better to go with probable. Also, Nietzsche talked about a will to power, which he said lay behind all philosophies and religions. Nietzsche was also kind of weird. I had a guy, I worked with a guy who, ironically, read Nietzsche religiously, and he was, and by he, I mean the guy that I worked with, was 100% a sociopath. So, yeah. Yes, here. Many of Nietzsche's contemporaries accused him of moral relativism. He has also been accused of championing the blonde beast over and against racially inferior others, especially Jews. Most scholars now agree that Nietzsche's most egregious statements about race were later additions by his racist sister and brother-in-law. Because, yeah, so there were certainly some things. Oh, Nietzsche went mad in 1889 and died in 1900. Yeah, there was a lot going on with Nietzsche. But I'm not gonna, like I said, not gonna go too much into that. Speaking of weird people, here's Sigmund Freud. This will be Pasteur, Max Planck. Oh, no Einstein, I guess. Sorry, Einstein. All right, let's get a little further along so that I can finish this on Wednesday. Let's talk about the economy of the turn of the century era, because I know economies aren't that interesting, but this is kind of cool. So, relatively speaking, people were doing pretty well. However, the competition was at an all-time high. Major investments in exchange making, or exchanges were making and losing fortunes overnight. So people were making a lot of money and people were going destitute. Again, meanwhile, like the people at the bottom were just stuck at the bottom. That never changes. Large groups that produce the same product would band together to form cartels, run rival competitors out of business by pushing prices too low for the rivals to make a profit, which would happen here in America with just one dude, Rockefeller, who would, just do a monopoly and run his competitors out of business. Needless to say, lots of corruption. Capitalist investors gladly paying politicians to push their own interests. Again, I could never imagine that in the modern day, where people with a lot of money would use their money to affect politics to make them more money. That seems crazy. Can you imagine, like a scummy car salesman? That'd be weird. Of course, though, major losses in economics. Increased farming in America, Southeast Asia, and Africa drove a lot of European farmers out of business, which meant more peasants went to the cities to try to make a living, which meant more people ended up in the slums. Because obviously, that's where everybody ends up. But there's more. The Second Industrial Revolution. So, America's got a weird definition of the Second Industrial Revolution. They're like, oh, we did more industry after the Second World War. It's like, that's not really the Second Industrial Revolution, but whatever, America, just because you missed the first one. So the First Industrial Revolution was characterized by steam and iron, with the textiles and like locomotives and whatnot. The Second Industrial Revolution was of gas and steel. We're now using gasoline, mostly diesel, and we're building with steel. And like with the First Industrial Revolution, this didn't just suddenly happen overnight. Well, now everybody's in the Second Industrial Revolution. Again, those of you that were here last semester, just like with the various ages in the ancient era, where it's like, oh, it's the Bronze Age now, and everybody's got bronze weapons. That's not how it happened. Great Britain, the United States, and Germany were the major producers during this time, owing to a pretty skilled workforce and the necessary technology to advance to the Second Industrial Revolution. So we've got big steel ships, big steel buildings, which is all well and good. I mean, that's the easiest thing to see. You see the big ships, you see the big buildings. I mean, a lot of the big buildings are still around. However, the major industrial operations were on a bigger scale than that, but on a scale that's less visible. Consumer goods. The book likes to say soap and soup. Stuff that everybody needs, that everybody's going to need more than once. And you mass produce that. So you mass produce, well, I mean, more than soap and soup, but it's easy to say. But like canned goods, canned soup. stuff that you can, again, easily churn out in high volumes, cheap, that everybody's going to need. I mean, I got to go to the grocery store today myself. And that's going to make the company a lot of money. I mean, it's going to cost a lot to, say, build a skyscraper, but you only need to do that, I mean, presumably once, because all the other skyscrapers have probably already got contractors to build them. It's hard to get multiple contracts for multiple skyscrapers in a city. And even if you do, even if you get a contract for a whole freaking city, which will be ridiculous, cool, once you're done, you're done. You've built the city. But if you're churning out food for people, you're never going to be done, presumably, unless you just like run out of business, or you like go out of business. I mean, the second industrial revolution also saw the rise of the department store, which I'll get into here in a minute. Also, though, we saw a decrease in free trade, because all this competition between these countries resulted in protective tariffs to try to keep their local goods being sold within their country, which meant that they weren't able to sell their goods to other countries, which is a short-term solution and never goes well long-term. But, what do I know? I'm just a historian. Anyway, here's one of the big ships. This isn't a dreadnought class. I always misspeak and say this is a dreadnought. This isn't a dreadnought class. This is one of the early battleships. This is, World War I era type of battleship. Obviously, British. They were the ones with all the battleships. Here is Macy's. Wait. No, it's not. This is the dome built for the Galeries Lafayette in Paris. Transforms the department store into a palace or even cathedral to commerce. Obviously, this is during Christmas because they've got this really horrific, gaudy Christmas decorations going on. I don't like department stores, and I really don't like department stores during Christmas. But yeah, this is this is that same image, just the thing here in the book. But yeah, so it's this place where you can go and buy pretty much anything you need in a single store, more or less. And that was revolutionary. That was like something that they had never had before. I mean, they had, like the 5 and cent stores and all these other little stores where you could go and get stuff. But to go to a single massive, horrifying edifice and buy like literally anything was wild. Okay, we'll do this before we finish. So, wages were rising, but the working class was still very much the bottom, and still barely making enough to get by because, well, like I said, that never ends. This led to some joining groups like the Socialists or Communists, while others just joined trade unions. So this is, again, for my folks in my American history class. We talked about this in greater detail in that, but most successful was the labor strike. In 1889, the London dock strike had 10,000 workers rallying in Trafalgar Square. Again, Trafalgar Square was created in honor of, the Battle of Trafalgar, and specifically Nelson. For higher wages, unlike most strikes, though, this one was actually successful, in part because supporters rallied and raised money so that the workers wouldn't starve during the strike. Because that's how strikes work. The workers go on strike, they refuse to work for the company, and now both the workers and the company are bleeding money. They're now trying to see who's going to blink first. The workers are going to either starve, or the company is going to lose so much money, they're going to break and be willing to negotiate, or they're going to go under. So the only way for a strike to work is for people to support the strike and help them out. Because your average everyday worker is not going to have the money to survive a big company. There was an eventual minor increase in wages, which was more than most strikes accomplished because, as we saw in American history, a lot of times the government would just like bring in the troops and like shoot the strikers. And then the ones that didn't get shot would be forced to go back to work. So we have the London dock strike with their London hats. Yeah, so we will get to more stuff later. I think this is actually a pretty good place to end because the next part is politics and whatnot, and then I get to talk about the Russo-Japanese War in greater detail, which I love to talk about, and then we'll start getting towards World War I. So yeah, that'll do it. I will see you guys on Wednesday.